The Kansas prairie stretched endless in 1873. Miles of nothing but grass, bending under wind that never stopped. Travelers crossing from Independence to reach the Western Territories faced a brutal choice. Push through without rest or stop at one of the few stations scattered across this emptiness. The Bender place sat along the Osage Trail in Labette County. A small wooden cabin, single room, maybe 16 feet by 20. Outside, an orchard of young fruit trees someone planted with optimism that didn't match the landscape. 4 people lived there. The family called themselves Bender, though later nobody could confirm that was their real name. John Bender Sr., somewhere past 60 years old, spoke broken English with a thick German accent. Most folks who met him thought he seemed slow, simple. He worked the small plot of land and mostly kept quiet. His wife, they said she was his wife, went by Kate Bender Sr. Same age range, same heavy accent. She looked older than her years. Harsh features. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it never reached her eyes. Then there was John Jr., mid-20s, tall and lean with dark hair. He had the same dull expression as his father. Travelers who stopped there said he moved like someone who'd worked hard labor his whole life, but his eyes held something else. Something that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. Kate Bender Jr. changed everything about how people saw that place. She was younger, maybe 23, 24, attractive in a way that stood out sharply against the rough prairie backdrop. Auburn hair, striking features. She spoke English without the accent that plagued the others. Some thought she'd been educated back east. Kate advertised herself as a healer, a spiritualist. She claimed powers to cure illness, communicate with the dead, reach across the veil between worlds. In 1873, rural Kansas, plenty of desperate people wanted to believe such things were possible. She placed advertisements in newspapers, Independence, Parsons, Cherryvale. The ads promised healing sessions, spiritual readings, relief from ailments both physical and otherwise. The cabin itself told you everything about how they lived. The single room divided by a canvas wagon cover hanging from the ceiling. It split the space in half. Front area where they served meals to travelers, back area where the family slept. Against that canvas divider sat a table, long, rough-hewn, positioned so anyone sitting with their back to the curtain faced the door, faced whoever else might be in the room. The Benders ran what passed for an inn. Travelers could stop, get a meal, rest before continuing west. The food was simple, usually just stew or salt pork, bread if they had it. Cost about $1, which was standard for that kind of place at that time. Most people who stopped there and kept moving never thought about it again. The Benders seemed strange, but strange was common enough on the frontier. You met odd people, you moved on, but some travelers never made it past that cabin. Dr. William York left Independence in March of 1873. Well-respected physician, 43 years old. He'd been visiting his brother in Fort Scott and was riding back home alone. His route took him directly along the Osage Trail, directly past the Bender place. He never arrived home. His brother, Colonel Alexander York, started asking questions immediately. William wasn't the type to just disappear. He was responsible, reliable. When weeks passed with no word, Colonel York knew something had gone very wrong. York wasn't the first to vanish along that stretch of trail. Locals had been whispering for months about missing persons. A man named Jones disappeared the previous year. A girl named Launcher and her father, gone. The whispers said maybe a dozen people had vanished. But Dr. York's disappearance was different. He had family with resources, family with connections. Colonel York had served in the Civil War. He knew how to organize, how to pressure authorities into action. In April of 1873, Colonel York arrived in Labette County with a group of men. They planned to search every homestead along the trail, talk to every settler, find out what happened to William. The search party reached the Bender cabin on a gray afternoon. Kate Jr. answered their knock. She was charming, helpful, said yes, a man matching Dr. York's description had stopped there briefly in March, had a meal, rested his horse, then continued west. She invited them inside, offered food. Colonel York accepted. He sat at that long table with his back to the canvas divider. Kate served stew, made conversation, asked about their search. Something felt wrong to York. He couldn't articulate what exactly. The way Kate watched him. The way John Jr. stood too close to the curtain. The heavy silence from the older benders. York thanked them for the meal. Left. But the feeling stayed with him. The township called a meeting in early May. More than 75 people showed up to discuss the missing travelers. Fear had been building for months, and Dr. York's disappearance finally pushed folks past the point of quiet worry. Colonel York stood up and listed every missing person he'd tracked. George Launcher and his daughter, a man named Mackenzie, Johnny Boyle, just a kid, 8 years old, Benjamin Brown, William York himself. The list kept going. Someone in the crowd mentioned the Benders, said they'd always seemed off, strange people keeping to themselves out there, but nobody had proof. The frontier meant privacy. You didn't accuse neighbors without evidence. Still, after that meeting, word spread fast. Suspicion landed heavy on that small cabin by the trail. The Benders heard the talk. Of course they did. Small community like that, everyone knew everything. On May 5th, 1873, a neighbor named Billy Toll rode past the Bender property. The place looked abandoned. No smoke from the chimney, no animals in the yard. The whole homestead felt dead. Toll mentioned it to others. Days passed. Nobody saw any of the 4 Benders. Their wagon was gone. Their horses were gone. They'd vanished completely. By May 9th, a group of men decided to investigate the property. They found the cabin empty, dirty dishes still on the table. Blankets piled in the corner, signs of people leaving in a hurry. The smell hit them before they saw anything else. Something awful coming from underneath the cabin. One man checked the cellar, just a small pit dug into the dirt floor. Empty except for crusted stains that looked black in the dim light. They went outside, started checking the grounds, the small orchard, the empty animal pens. And then they reached the garden plot behind the cabin. The earth there looked wrong, disturbed. Sections that appeared softer than surrounding soil, like someone had been digging recently. They grabbed tools from the cabin, started digging in the first soft patch. 3 feet down they found him, George Launcher, throat cut so deep it nearly took his head off. Body dumped face down in a shallow grave. They kept digging, found his daughter next, just a child. Same cause of death, throat slashed. Then they found Dr. William York, Johnny Boyle, the 8-year-old boy, Benjamin Brown. Body after body pulled from that Kansas dirt. Every single victim showed the same pattern. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, throat cut. Some had been stripped of their belongings, clothes, money, anything valuable. The neighbor Toll remembered details suddenly. He'd stopped at the Bender's place himself several months back, sat at that table for a meal. Kate had asked him to sit with his back to the curtain. The seat of honor, she called it. He'd refused. Said he preferred facing the room. Kate seemed annoyed but didn't push it. Now he understood why. Anyone sitting with their back to that canvas divider couldn't see what was coming. Couldn't see someone slipping through from behind. Couldn't see the hammer. The method became clear once they examined the cabin more carefully. Someone, probably John Jr., based on his height and build, would wait behind the curtain. When a victim sat down for a meal, positioned with their back exposed, he'd strike through the canvas, one massive blow with a hammer to the base of the skull. The victim would drop, maybe dead already, maybe unconscious. Then they'd drag the body into the back area, cut the throat to finish the job and prevent any noise, strip anything valuable, hold the corpse until dark when they could bury it in the garden. Clean, efficient, practiced. Investigators found the hammer. Still had dried matter stuck to its head, found blood soaked into the floorboards behind that curtain, found stains in the cellar where they'd probably held bodies before burial. 9 bodies total came out of that ground, 9 confirmed victims. But most people believed there were more. The Benders had been operating that cabin for over 2 years. Hundreds of travelers had passed through that area. How many stopped at the wrong place? Some estimates put the real number at 20, maybe more. But without bodies, without names, those victims stayed missing. The manhunt started immediately. Posses formed in every nearby town. Labette County, Montgomery County, Cherokee County. Everyone wanted the Benders caught. Colonel York offered a reward, $500 per Bender. That was serious money in 1873, enough to make every bounty hunter and fortune seeker in Kansas start searching. But the Benders had a head start. 5 days minimum, maybe more. They could be anywhere. Witnesses came forward slowly. A ticket agent in Thaya remembered selling train passage to a family matching their description, said they'd boarded a train heading east toward Missouri, but another witness in Parsons swore they saw the Benders heading south into Indian Territory. Some folks claimed they'd split up, old couple going one direction, younger two going another. Made sense strategically, but nobody could confirm it. The search expanded into Indian Territory, Missouri, Texas. Lawmen checked every town, every rail station, every ferry crossing. Descriptions circulated in newspapers across 6 states. Reports flooded in. Someone spotted Kate in St. Louis. John Jr. was supposedly seen in Texas. The old couple turned up in 3 different Kansas towns simultaneously, which obviously meant none of those sightings were real. Every lead went nowhere. Vigilante groups formed. Some men weren't interested in waiting for legal justice. They wanted frontier justice, fast and final. Stories spread about groups of armed riders heading out at night, supposedly tracking the Benders. Whether those stories were true or just talk, nobody knows. One persistent rumor claimed a vigilante group caught the Benders in 1874, said they found them hiding in Oklahoma Territory. Hanged all 4 from a tree and left the bodies. No trial, no questions. Another version said they caught only the younger 2, shot them and burned the bodies. The old couple escaped, but no proof ever materialized. No bodies identified, no confession, no closure. Law enforcement investigated dozens of potential sightings over the next several years. In 1889, 16 years after the crimes, authorities in Montana arrested a woman they believed was Kate Bender, brought her back to Kansas for identification. Several witnesses looked at her. Some said yes, definitely her. Others said no, wrong person. The woman herself denied everything, said her name was Sarah Davis, said she'd never been to Kansas before this arrest. They held her for weeks while newspapers ran wild with speculation. Was this really Kate Bender finally caught, or just another false lead? Eventually, they let her go. Not enough certainty to prosecute. That same pattern repeated multiple times. Arrest someone, get conflicting witness statements, release them for lack of evidence. The Bender case became one of America's earliest unsolved serial murder mysteries. Before people even used terms like serial killer, before criminal profiling, before modern forensics. What made it particularly frustrating was how simple the crime was. No mystery about the method, no question about what happened in that cabin. The evidence was overwhelming. But the Benders themselves? Gone like smoke. Some theories suggested they'd changed their names and disappeared into normal society. Kate especially could have done that easily. She was educated, attractive, spoke English well. She could have moved to a city, claimed a new identity, lived out her life without anyone knowing. The older Benders seemed less capable of that kind of deception, their language barrier, their appearance. But maybe they found some isolated community where nobody asked questions, or maybe they died shortly after fleeing, killed by each other, by vigilantes, by simple frontier hardship. That prairie killed plenty of people through perfectly natural causes. The property itself became a macabre tourist attraction almost immediately. People traveled from surrounding states to see the murder cabin, took pieces of it as souvenirs. The building was eventually torn apart by souvenir hunters. Boards, nails, pieces of that infamous canvas curtain. The Bender family represents something dark about American expansion. The West attracted people running from something: criminal pasts, failed lives, secrets nobody back east needed to know. The frontier offered anonymity. You could claim any name, any history. Nobody checked. Nobody cared as long as you kept to yourself. That freedom created opportunity for people like the Benders. They set up in a remote location, preyed on vulnerable travelers, operated for years before anyone connected the disappearances. The case changed how people thought about travel safety. Before the Benders, folks worried about outlaws, bandits, organized gangs. But the Benders weren't outlaws in the traditional sense. They were settlers, business owners. They looked legitimate. That was more terrifying than any masked robber. You could prepare for bandits, stay alert, travel armed. But how do you prepare for the family offering you dinner? The psychological aspect haunts the case. Did all 4 Benders participate equally? Or did some just go along? Evidence suggested John Jr. did most of the physical killing. The hammer blows required strength, height, someone young and powerful. But Kate clearly participated. She lured victims, positioned them, kept them distracted while murder happened behind that curtain. The older Benders probably helped with disposal, burying bodies, cleaning blood, running the property so nothing looked suspicious. Whether they planned this from the beginning or gradually fell into it remains unknown. Did they come to Kansas intending to kill? Or did opportunity present itself and they simply took it? Some historians suggest financial desperation drove them. Homesteading was brutal. Many families failed. Maybe the Benders saw robbery murder as survival. Others argue Kate was the driving force. Newspapers at the time described her as manipulative, seductive. Maybe she convinced or coerced the others into participating. The spiritualist angle adds another layer. Kate's advertisements, her claims of healing powers. Did she believe any of it, or was it purely manipulation? Some victims may have specifically sought Kate out for spiritual consultations, traveled to that cabin hoping for healing or contact with dead relatives. Instead, they got murder. That betrayal of trust, that exploitation of grief and desperation might be the darkest element of the entire case. The Benders killed at least 9 people, possibly more than 20. Each victim had a family, friends, people who loved them, communities that noticed their absence. Dr. William York left behind a wife and children. Johnny Boyle was 8 years old, traveling with his father who was also killed. What did that child understand in his final moments? The brutality was systematic, calculated. This wasn't passion or rage. It was business, and they almost got away with it completely. If Dr. York had been less connected, if his brother had been less determined, the Benders might have operated for years longer, might have vanished on their own terms, with nobody ever finding those bodies. The case remains officially unsolved. The Kansas State Historical Society maintains files on it. Researchers still occasionally find new documents, new theories, but the Benders themselves, their fate stays unknown. Maybe they died shortly after fleeing. Maybe they lived long lives under different names. Maybe descendants alive today carry Bender blood without knowing the family history. The cabin is gone. The property returned to Prairie. Labette County erected a historical marker near the site in 1961. Tourists still visit, still photograph that empty ground where 9 bodies, minimum, were pulled from Kansas dirt. The story endures because it reveals something uncomfortable about human nature, about what people become when consequences disappear, about the monsters who look like neighbors. The Bender family ran a murder inn on the Kansas prairie in 1873. They killed travelers systematically for profit. Then they vanished into American history, never caught, never punished, never made to answer for what they did in that small cabin along the Osage Trail.